I wanted to welcome you to our fall 2019 webinar, Board Leadership Succession, How to Identify, Recruit, and Appoint Your Next Board Leader. Is anyone, before we get started, is anyone having issues hearing us at this point? Just kind of send me a little note through your Zoom group chat. I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to keep going. A few helpful notes. Please keep your microphone set on mute so that we can all hear Dennis when he's giving a seminar. Dennis will take questions at the end. You can post your questions by clicking on the chat icon. I'm going to be nearby. If you experience any technical difficulties, just send me an email to michelle@denniscmiller.com and I'll try to get you sorted out. And know that if you have to pop off early or you want to share this with someone else, we'll be circulating the slides and the recording to participants after the webinar. I want to take a minute to introduce Dennis. Some of you have met Dennis or attended one of his other seminars, workshops, conference presentations. Maybe you've read one of his 4 books on nonprofit leadership, or perhaps his own personal memoir. He has worked with hundreds of nonprofit organizations across the country, and he's been enormously successful in helping organizations unlock their true potential. He's very inspirational, and I think you're going to really gain a lot out of this particular workshop. He is a sought-after speaker, retreat facilitator, leadership coach, and executive search consultant. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dennis, and it's all yours, Dennis.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everybody. So we're going to cover the issues Michelle just described about the issues of board leadership succession. We're going to start with what the board chair does or should do, how one can go about board leadership succession, but also more importantly, we're going to talk about some of the very common obstacles that exist at times in finding someone to lead your board, and we'll be addressing all those. And as Michelle indicated, I'll be definitely taking questions and we'll kind of go from there. The issues of what your board chair does are relevant whether you're a large university, medical center, or a small nonprofit serving those in your community. So what does the board chair do in a nonprofit organization, which is obviously very different from what a board chair does in the corporate world? In the corporate world, as you know, the board chair is usually the CEO and is a management position. I know that's sort of basic, but to a lot of people, they sometimes don't know that. And the board chair in a nonprofit organization is not involved in management. It's the role of the CEO. But what he or she needs to do is, in collaboration with the CEO, it should be a partnership with the CEO, steer the organization towards achieving its vision and strategic goals. The board chair's role is always kind of thinking down the road. Are we on the right course? Are we getting there? A very important, crucial issue in the role of the board chair, sometimes not understood, is the work that they must do behind the scenes in building consensus among members of the board. So if there's a big strategic issue coming up, whatever it might be, board chair's role is to, well before the board meeting, well before there's some vote, is make sure he or she is talking to all constituents and sort of building consensus behind the scenes. That's a very important role and sometimes not thoroughly understood. Certainly, the board chair wants to continually make the board think strategically about mission, which is why you exist, and vision, which is your future direction. Again, the board chair, he or she, should lead the entire board in making sure that all the board work is completed. That generally means an appropriate committee structure, that successfully align with the organization's strategic vision. And each committee of the board should have a goal related to the overall organizational goals. Certainly the board chair supervises the CEO, builds a strong and supportive relationship with the CEO. I always like to say that the CEO works with the board and on behalf of the board. But in terms of a direct report, I always advocate that there only be one direct report, which is the CEO reporting to the board chair. Now, in some organizations, the board chair term is board president. And sometimes in the nonprofit world, it's the CEO, sometimes it's president or executive director. And throughout this webinar, the board chair will refer to whether you're chair or president of the board and whether you're CEO, executive director, president. A big role for the board chair is that to appoint members to serve as committee chairs. I do not think it's necessary for the board to approve of that. That's a prerogative of the chair. He or she, again, will want to get some input from other members of the board and leaders and have input as to who's going to serve on the committees, but it's the prerogative of the chair to appoint people to serve on the committee. I apologize for that. Certainly a key part, but not the major responsibility, is facilitating board meetings and approving meeting agendas. I do recommend that at least a week or two ahead of time that the board chair and the CEO and perhaps other members of the board or vice chair, and sometimes legal counsel or whatever you have, meet ahead of time to prepare the agenda or approve the agenda and make sure all key items are on the agenda. It's important that the board chair play a heavy role in engaging all members to participate in all board decisions. One of the things that I highly recommend for every board is, on average of every board meeting, the 50% rule, which is that sometimes board meetings, it might be 20%, sometimes it might be 80%, but in addition to having your kind of committees reporting to the board and maybe the CEO or president report, you want to have at least one key strategic issue, either that you're facing today, that you're going to be challenging, and other aspects of board governance, engaging them in that kind of a conversation. Could you imagine a board that met with and said, I want to approve the minutes of last month's meeting, all in favor say aye. And this month we're going to talk about what's the impact we're having in our community or our stakeholders, or how will we proceed, or what's our reputation. It's important to have engaging conversation. Certainly communicate with all members of the board on a regular basis. And the board chair should participate in, obviously, in board recruitment and board reappointment, whether it's it doesn't have to be involved in the governance committees. It doesn't have to be a particular member of any committee, but should be knowledgeable of what is going on in terms of recruitment and reappointment. Basic responsibilities, as most people know, serves as ex officio of all board committees. Certainly should lead the board's evaluation of the CEO on an annual basis. I do believe that the entire board should have input into the CEO's evaluation. Sometimes it's left just to the executive committee. Sometimes it is a smaller group of the chair or vice chair, but I think everybody should play a role in the CEO's evaluation. However, it's usually the board chair that leads that effort, and it is the one that will meet with the CEO and give him or her feedback. And certainly ensures that the board's performance is measured on a regular basis. One of my favorite expressions that many of you have heard is that good boards evaluate CEOs, great boards evaluate themselves. So it's a separate discussion on a different day for a different topic, but I do think the board chair should see that the board performance is also measured. All right. Let's turn to what are the characteristics of a high-performing chair. A lot of these are pretty basic here, but Certainly, you want your board chair or people you're considering for your future board chair to be a trusted and respected colleague. Certainly someone who can make decisions with excellent judgment, not self-absorbed or self-involved or self-conflicted. Someone ideally with leadership experience, and we're going to talk about that in a second here. Clearly, integrity is a must. It's just beyond a must. Past experience in a role as a board member, make reference to it later here, but only in rare, highly unusual circumstances should someone become board chair who's not from your board. Clearly, as you just talked about the roles and responsibilities, an excellent communicator, and committed to the time requirements of the job. There is a lot of time we committed to the job of chair. It doesn't have to be as bad as it is for a lot of people, and we're going to talk about that when we deal with some of the challenges. But let's no doubt about it, being the board chair is a serious time commitment to the organization and to the CEO. And clearly, obviously, a characteristic is to be politically savvy as board chair here. So I'm going to talk now about what would be a normal process for board leadership succession. And then I said we're going to talk then shortly about some of the common obstacles that many organizations have in achieving this. So the first thing I would do today is, as board chair, as CEO, whether you're president of your organization or not, is begin to have a conversation about assessing the leadership talent of your current board members. Who has demonstrated leadership ability, who has demonstrated effectiveness as a board member, who has brought things to the table, who was respected. As indicated previously, you want to identify your new board chair from current members. You want to start asking your board chair to identify potential candidates from the current board as well. The board chair should absolutely play a large role in identifying his or her successor. The best time to do that, believe it or not, is when they start their role as board chair. Along with the board chair, perhaps with your governance committee, which is the sort of a modern, mature version of a nominating committee of the board or a board development committee, begin having a series of discussions, perhaps as far as a year out, with potential candidates on your board that either you think you have an interest in them or they think there's an interest in them, but have those discussions. One of the things that you may want to offer in terms of support early on in the process is if you want to offer any specific type of training or coaching that they may want. So as all of you know, if you're a CEO, CEO can be a lonely world once you make it to that position, and being a board chair sometimes can be a lonely role. So having a source of training or coaching is ideal. One of the things that is really, really important is instituting ongoing training for all current board members in all aspects of board governance. You know, certainly, you know, my background in the first phase of my career as a medical center CEO, it was clear that physicians who were well-trained and educated continually went for education. We take our staffs and we continually provide, you know, staff development training. We have faculty and who continue to go to get continuing education credits. It's really a requirement and a must on the president or CEO's part with the board chair to, you know, perhaps either every aspect of a board meeting to have some aspect of board training, board governance training, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Certainly, we said consider offering the board chair-elect a professional coach or mentor to support his or her transition during the first term in office. That certainly could be your current board chair who's stepping down. It could, and someone else, but clearly if that helps with someone making that decision to jump in the pool, so to speak, knowing there's a life preserver on it, that would be a good thing to do. Something else is that in the process of board chair succession is find ways to continually reward and recognize those who serve on your board, and find ways to continually recognize those who have been board chairs. If we don't make the position attractive and rewarding and recognize their efforts, it's going to hinder perhaps those seeking the position. I know this is common, I'm sure most of you do this, but everybody who becomes onto your board, find an opportunity for them to participate in a wide array of activities, whether it's certainly everybody should serve on at least one committee. Those that have been on a committee for a year or so, certainly an opportunity to chair a committee or to move to another committee. Creating the task force of looking at a strategic issue, or being on an advisory board, and particularly sending them to conferences or online courses, which I'll share a little bit later in the webinar today. But certainly those are things that you want to do. Build a culture of success, creating a culture of a winning attitude. When people feel part of a winner, when they feel that your nonprofit, whether again, you are involved in any aspect of children and family services, you're involved in the environment, education, healthcare, whatever you're involved in, criminal justice, etc. When you create a culture of success, when you strive for excellence in all you do, people will be more likely to want to take on a leadership role. I mentioned this before, but certainly find a way to recognize board chairs, either some formal recognition program or an annual benefit event. One of the things that I did in my career before I founded my firm 15, 16 years ago was I created a chairman's club. And back then, they were all men, but we created a chairman's club and developed sport jackets and an actual logo, and had an annual dinner with spouses and partners and significant others, and made people feel kind of special, and sort of a way of patting them on the back and thanking them for their efforts, because it is it's a phenomenal responsible job, and yet it sometimes can be a thankless job for too many people. And as indicated here, make the role of being the board chair something special. And I think that's kind of, whatever kind of treats you can provide, but that's kind of an important part here. So oftentimes, it's very challenging for a lot of organizations to find somebody selecting, wanting to be the chair. And why is that? And what can you do about it? Well, clearly, based upon my experience of 35 plus years, perception that just the job of chair just requires too much time and too much work, and they feel that between their job and family just don't have it. And you can deal with that, but that's one thing. Number two is the candidates feeling a sense of lack of preparedness or board training, that they haven't had any schooling in that. Excuse me. And they talk about that. And so, no one would want to step into the OR to do surgery without going to medical school. Well, board members, people becoming board chairs want to feel prepared. Anybody else would feel unprepared for something else. So we got to focus on how to prepare them. Oftentimes they say, hey, just too much board politics and bureaucracy to deal with. And, they don't want to be hassled with that. And you need to be cognizant of that, because are you making it, again, an attractive place for your organization? Knowing these are some of the issues, and others which we're going to talk about is that obviously you can do something about that now here. We talked about this before about the positive side of, oftentimes very few rewards and recognition. So people are like, I don't want to do that. Another challenge for having someone be the successor to your current board chair is the fact that oftentimes the board committee structures are not properly set up and board roles are poorly defined. And it's beyond the scope of today's webinar, but clearly something to mention here is that when the board committee structures are not aligned and the committees aren't aligned and roles are poorly defined, it clearly becomes a challenge as the board chair. And so one of the things that you want to make sure of is the following. Make sure your committees are set up to align with your strategic vision. There's no sense having a committee just because you've had it for the past 15 years. Many of you know, little joke I say, well, what's the best thing sometimes a board member can hear is that the committee's been canceled, committee meeting's been canceled. Every committee should have at least one goal on an annual basis that deals with the overall goal of the organization. And so I like to see committees, from the nominating and board development committee become a governance committee that has a lot of responsibility for board education, not just appointing officers of the board, but going through a process of board recruitment, board reappointment, board education, et cetera here. In many cases, the board chair has not planned or groomed a successor. And they might have been, some cases, board chair for a long period of time. And though I think longevity is important to an organization, but that's a failure on the role of the board chair today if they're not planning or grooming a successor. And that's certainly a common obstacle here. These are some things that you clearly can face. Now, many of you may have to deal with this, is that you could have a board chair that just won't relinquish control of the reins, that he or she, wants to be in charge and somehow thinks it's sort of a God-given right to be there forever. And that's not helpful, and that needs to be dealt with again. When I talk about has the board ever evaluated itself, that should be brought up in that board evaluation. Certainly, this is a common issue of, no one on the board ever discussed succession during the term of the current chair. And then you find yourself, the chairwoman or the chairman says, by the way, I'm going to be stepping down in 2 to 3 months, I'm moving or retiring. And everybody looks around at each other in a panic about, well, who's going to be the board chair? That's not proper governance. And I know you know that, but succession planning is a key item here. Here's something that is so crucial, though. When recruiting candidates for the board, I often talk about, and this is going to be in our next webinar about board recruitment, board reappointment. But besides recruiting for skills sets like we need a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, an accountant, a CPA, or a lawyer, besides this, the work skills. I highly recommend that there be a discussion about what are the ideal competencies that you would need for the board. And that involves things like leadership. Certainly it involves things like being a strategic thinker, a brand builder, a change agent. And so when an organization does not recruit for leadership, it's no surprise at times when no one wants to step up and take on the role if you have not recruited a pitcher on your baseball team. The chances of someone wanting to go to the mound are slim and none. So it's really, really important to recruit for leadership. So the question is, does your board recruit for leadership today? And what does your board recruit for? And so the issue of leadership is crucial in helping you understand and determine how to go about board succession. Certainly we identified the things you need to do today as identifying potential board chairs on your team, making sure they are provided support and education and ongoing training. But certainly the issue of appointment is really crucial about leadership here. In our next webinar on October 2nd, and I will be taking your questions shortly here, I'm going to talk more about how to recruit the ideal board matrix of skills, competencies, and personal attributes. Again, the ideal board is made up of people of a lot of different competencies and skill sets, not just the traditional Noah's Ark of skills. And it's amazing how many people don't look for leaders and then wondering why they find difficulty in finding someone to take on the realms here. I want to go over a couple of things else we can here. We're announcing that a first in a series of online courses that we're rolling out. The first course is coming out now. It's how to become a high-performing nonprofit board. It's a course that is licensed to all of your board members to be taken at their home, in their office, on their mobile application. The course has 6 modules, and it has a course workbook. And we recommend that obviously you can pick one of many of the topics, which I'm going to show you here. On this slide, these are the topics that the course has, and clearly any one of these can be an item of discussion at any board meeting, which will certainly find ways of engaging your board, the characteristics of high-performing boards and the obstacles to that. We just talked about here today the roles and responsibilities of the board chair, so you get a piece of what that is. We talked today about the characteristics of high-performing chairs and board leadership succession. The next webinar, we're going to be certainly talking about a better practice, a better way of going about board recruitment, reappointment, and best practices. The board-CO relationship. The course will cover today's executive leadership competencies, which are oftentimes very different than what they were in the past. The impact in the board's role in having a positive and inspiring vision, and what I call how do you increase your nonprofit stock price. I know everybody's a 501c3, 4C, or 6C organization. However, I do believe in kind of a figurative sense that your organization has a stock price, and what is it selling at today, and is it going up, is it going down, and how are people reacting to it? We're going to have a webinar also following about the characteristics of fundraising organizations and how to address most board members would rather have a root canal or stick pins in their eyes to raise money. And the course also will cover how to deal with difficult board behavior. And last but not least, and we're going to have a webinar on this as well, on how to measure and evaluate the board's annual performance and the role for that here. There's any of my books are available for you. And I also want you to know, before we take any questions here, that on my website, DennisCMiller.com, there's a tremendous amount of free information for all of you to share with your boards or yourselves here. There's a lot of webinars that I've done in the past, and again, you can share this one because you'll get a recording of it. There are a lot of articles, there are a lot of blogs, there are a lot of free information. Any one of you would like a copy of my book, kind of let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. And let's see here, Michelle, and we're going to now take.
Sorry, I'm just interrupting, Dennis, because I see that some of you have joined by phone. If you have, and you have a question for Q&A, and you're not someplace where you can put a question into the chat, shoot me a quick email, and I'll put it into the chat so that Dennis sees it. Back to you, Dennis.
Yeah, so we have plenty of time. I just want to make sure that I see if there's any questions you have. And by the way, we can keep it anonymous here, but a couple of questions that Is there a question here? Okay.
Yeah.
The answer is, I'll keep your names anonymous, but the answer is yes. A copy of these slides will be sent to you, Chris, after the webinar, absolutely. And so the recording and the slides will be sent for each webinar, and this one is absolutely, yep. Another question that we're getting up here. I think, you know, one of the things people say to me is, what's the right time to begin having a conversation with potential board chairs is at the time of board recruitment. You know, I jokingly say maybe it's because of my age, having been a 37-year-old CEO, and I'm a few years past that for those that know me here, but you know, leadership development is a key process here. So I would say that. Let's see if there's any other questions that are coming up here. Anybody else have any questions here that we can? I'm sure there are. Let's just see what we can get in here. Let's see here. All right, let's see what we, hold on, let's see what we got here. Okay. Okay. So I got one here. I've been on several boards. Some have been very successful, others not. How does a local performing board turn itself around? Oh, that's a great question. And so here's what I say to people, since I work with boards every day. You know, one of the great things about People Life is the volunteerism, but with few exceptions. I don't really fault members of the board, few exceptions. We don't do a good job as executives in providing board training. There are a lot of sources around the country and conferences and organizations. I speak at most of them. But I think what I find is that when they hear about what it means to be a high-performing board and what those characteristics are, and I'll give you an example, they'll learn it. So I am in the process of right now doing a retreat, and every organization has something going on. They ask questions about committees and everything else here. And so when people, how to turn a low performing board around is provide board education. Have someone like myself or others come in and make a presentation to the board, invite them to be part of a summit. But someone on the board has to take ownership of it. It can't just be the CEO. And so it's really, really important. But low performing boards can be turned around with understanding where you are. And I do dozens and dozens of board organizational assessments all the time. Happy to discuss with you doing one, but clearly a low performing board generally turned around with some education and some inspirational leadership from the board, a board member. Let's see what else we have in terms of questions. Let's see, we have another question here. Does anybody have any other additional questions they want to ask? All right, well, if there's no other questions, here's what I suggest. My email is Dennis with 2 N's, Dennis at Dennis C as in Charles Miller.com, Dennis at DennisCMiller.com, lowercase, no periods over .com. Oh, we have one question. One of the questions is sometimes a board's charter can prevent good governance. I would have to know more about what's in the charter. Now, some of it is this. There are a number of organizations that have that are political appointments to either through a governor, it could be a mayor, council, freeholder board, etc. And since they're political appointments, they don't always have a sense of ownership, and they've just been sort of appointed. And that can be a challenge, but I believe that every organization at any level, whether you've got a budget of $500,000 or you've got a budget of $50 billion, I think there's absolutely an opportunity for better governance. And what have I found comes out of this? I find board members have a better experience and a sense of fulfillment and meaningfulness to them when boards perform at a higher level. Part of my work in my firm and my courses and books, etc., is to provide an aspect of leadership in that direction here. The ultimate beneficiary are those we serve, whether there are clients and families in need of youth services, whether they're students on our campus or patients in our hospital or people in our theaters. Every organization can improve its governance, but you need to know what good governance means, how to do it, and usually, and I don't mean this as a selling tool, but usually sometimes for some reason psychologically an outside third party coming in and mentioning it to them can work. Don't ask me why, for some reason it happens here. So, also what you can do too is, here's what it comes down to. Good board performance requires board leadership, period. And some of you have organizations that people aspire to be on the board, and some of you struggle to have made a quorum. But everything in what I see in my world comes down to leadership, either at the executive level or the board level. Now, I'm going to get ahead of ourselves here, but in a short time, there's a course we're rolling out, online course about how to become a high-performing nonprofit executive team. But you can become a better board chair. You can recruit people to take on that job, and they can do a better job. Provide them with education, provide them with assistance, and if you all take on your role, I think will be better for you. Again, if you have other questions and prefer to address with me, email them to me. Again, I'm happy to schedule a sort of a 30-minute conference call with any of you that would rather talk to me online in person. And feel free to please view our website for the services we offer, DennisCMiller.com. We do a tremendous amount of executive search, and we do obviously a tremendous amount of board and leadership performance coaching. I thank you for participating in today's webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you again.